All right, hey class of 2014, welcome to AP Gov. This is lecture 1 from Unit 1, which is Constitutional Underpinnings. It is one of 6 of the major units for the year, and so welcome. These lectures are about 20 minutes long, and the idea is they go through the night's notes, which we will go over. So this matches up with your day 1 agenda, pages 1 and 2 in the lecture notes, and I'm going to kind of give you an overview in 20 minutes, and then your job is to be ready for a quiz on this stuff when we meet on day 1, okay? So this first unit is constitutional underpinning, so we'll spend some time looking at the document itself and trying to kind of see the system in which the framers of our Constitution, our social contract, laid out. All right, and so the first thing you need to understand are these two ideas of democracy versus republic. All right, a democracy ruled by the people, and generally the way that we're going to use this word as a definition is that a democracy is a government in which the people themselves actually write and vote on the laws. All right, whereas a republic is a system that the people don't write the laws and vote on the laws. What they do is they elect the representatives to then write legislation and the laws for us and carry that stuff out. All right, so the key there is a republic is a representative democracy, whereas a direct democracy is one in which the people themselves actually write the law, vote on law, pass the law. All right, and what you have to understand is the framers, or even in human history at this moment, direct democracy or democracy is something that is viewed with, they're reluctant to allow it to go on, because what they've believed is that democracies could kind of devolve into or turn into this kind of chaotic systems in which the people could not make decisions and therefore would turn into chaos. And so what the framers believed, and they look back historically at ancient Greece and the city-states, they look back to the Roman Republic. What they figure out is that a direct democracy can only work in certain systems, and therefore they choose a representative or republican form of democracy. And that's not republican as in the party, it's representative democracy republican, all right, with a little r. And so what the framers believed is they believed that a direct democracy was impractical, in the sense that you couldn't get hundreds of millions of people, tens of millions of people, together to write laws, to carry out laws. All right, there's too many people. They also believe that the masses were ignorant, in the sense that the masses spent more time worrying about how to make a daily living rather than time studying government and how best to run a government. All right. They also believed that the masses could be swayed by demagogues, and demagogues are these powerful speakers that can get people to act in certain ways just by their beautiful skills of oration. All right, they would be tricked into going and backing certain politicians that maybe weren't good. So they believed the masses were ignorant. They believed that the country was too big. They believed that the masses could be swayed by demagogues. All right, they also believed that simply the masses would be motivated by passion rather than reason. And the way you need to think about passion is impulsive. The framers believed that the masses were motivated by impulse/passion, whereas the elites, educated, wealthy, successful people could be trusted to make decisions based on reason or logic. And so they decide to go with this idea of a representative democracy, all right, for those reasons, which we'll dive into more in the class, all right? Now, one thing you want to look at is that quote in your notes on page 1 that says, "A republic secures the advantages of a direct democracy while curing its weaknesses." What you need to think about is kind of what I just listed. What were the weaknesses of a direct democracy, but what are the advantages of a direct democracy, all right, or democracy in general? What is good about a democracy? All right, and you probably will come up with the same kind of ideas that the framers did when they wrote this Constitution. All right, now, if you go down to Roman numeral 3 in the notes, it talks about power. So it says distribution of power in our system. And generally, you need to think of who controls our government. Is it the masses, right, which is covered in the majoritarian view of government, which says the will of the people can influence government to make decisions that the will of the people desire. So you can say the masses influence or have power in our system. Is it the elites? Now, elites inherently means smaller groups of people. So who are those smaller groups of people? Karl Marx believed, it was the economic elites had the power in a democratic capitalistic system. All right. Whereas C. Wright Mills believed that there was business, there was military, and political elites. So members of Congress, right? Their staffers, members of the bureaucracy, members of the executive branch, state governments. Those political elites controlled things. All right. Whereas a guy named Max Weber, a German political scientist, talked about the bureaucracy. Now, just a quick overview, because we have a unit in the bureaucracy, and I think you'll understand this later in the year. The bureaucracy, for example, is the Department of Defense. And the bureaucracy's job is to carry out law. Congress writes the law, the president signs the law and executes the law, and it's the bureaucracy that helps the president carry out those laws. And because of that, Max Weber believed that those people had an incredible amount of power in our system. Now, just to kind of go the other way, think about it in a monarchy or a dictatorship. Where's the power? Well, the power tends to reside in that leader. Where in a republic, we're going to spend the whole year trying to figure out who really has power. Now, the other view is there's the masses, and then there's the elites. And then there's the other view of pluralism, which basically says political power is so spread out in our system. At the city level, at the county level, at the state level, at the federal level, there's so much power spread out that no one person or one group of people can control all of politics. All right? And therefore, I think the framers probably believed that that was going to be the idea, that there would be some elites, some of the masses, and this mixture of the sharing of power. At certain times it's the masses, at certain times it's the elites. All right? But we will study who those groups are in this pluralistic system. All right? Now, hyperpluralism just means power is so spread out, and there's so many groups that are so strong that nobody can ever come to consensus and get something done, and therefore hyperpluralism is kind of a negative thing in the sense that nothing gets done. Pluralism is the view that there's the masses and the elites, and things get done, but it's the result of kind of political compromise. All right? All right. Now, the other thing about this democratic system is we have some fundamental or important democratic values. So when I say democratic, again, it's a little d, and it just means democracy. Now, another thing just to back up is remember that a republic is a representative democracy. Democracy itself, demos, is the Greek root for people, and the krasi is rule. So people rule, people power. All right? So a republican system is a democratic system. It's just an indirect democracy versus direct democracy. All right? We have some fundamental democratic values. Popular sovereignty, which is power by the people. Respect for the individual. All right? Liberty. Right? The whole reason this political experiment exists is for liberty. All right? And that will be a fundamental theme all year. How do we balance this idea of liberty and order? At times, we need order and stability, but at other times, liberty. And how do we balance those two? That's called the balancing test. Is this balance between freedom and order, or liberty and order? All right? And then equality is a fundamental value in our society. But it's not equality of outcome, which means everyone will be the same, everyone will have the same wealth, everyone will have the same education. What this means is the equality of opportunity, in which we create a playing field in our society in which all of you, everybody, can compete equally and has the opportunity to succeed. All right, we'll dive into that. These are all kind of intro statements for the year, all right? So those were our fundamental democratic values. And again, just trying to frame those up a little bit. We'll get more in depth in those later. All right? The next thing is the fundamental democratic processes, which means the things we do that are fair, all right, are important. So one, free and fair elections with parties that compete, all right? Majority rule with minority rights. All right? The idea is your minority rights are those natural rights, which we will get into: life, liberty, and property. You may have heard of it as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Your natural rights, even if you're in the minority mathematically in some kind of vote in a democracy, it's majority rule with minority rights. The majority cannot theoretically take away your natural rights. They may write a law that you don't agree with, but they can't take away your fundamental or natural rights. Right? Freedom of expression is an incredible, important part of this fundamental democratic processes, and it's in the First Amendment, which we'll get into. All right? And the right to assemble and the right to protest are both within the First Amendment as well. All right? Hey, and another thing is that tyranny of the majority. I think quite often, because we think of democracies, the democracies can't be tyrannical. And tyrannical is when government, power is in the hands of a few small people that use it to violate your natural rights. I think most people associate tyranny with, dictatorships like a Hitler or like a Mussolini or like a king, a monarchy of some kind. Remember that democracies can be tyrannical at moments, which we will look at throughout history, all right? So this idea of the tyranny of the majority is something very much that the framers believed could be a problem, and therefore they built in some systems into our Constitution. They're going to try to deal with those problems, all right? And which, we're going to cover right now, these fundamental democratic structures, which are essentially in the Constitution. The F-bomb, federalism. Federalism, which is a word that you're going to be dreaming about for months, is the constitutional division of power between the federal government and the state governments. The sharing of power, states' rights versus the federal government, which was an issue we will look at all year. The framers believed that was important. And the reason they thought that it was important is, one, is remember when this Constitution is written in 1787 and then ratified in 89, the 13 colonies, or the 13 states at that time, viewed themselves very much as, the state first and then an American citizen. And, whereas I think today we view ourselves as Americans and then maybe Nevadans and Californians and Oregonians and so on. All right? And so it was important to keep power at the state level and power at the national level. I think they believed that that would also prevent this idea of tyranny and people's natural rights being violated. All right? They were very reluctant to concentrate any kind of power in any one person or group of people's hands, and therefore they had it at the state and the federal level. All right? The constitutional division or separation of power between the national and state governments. All right? Separation of powers is another thing, and that's pretty easy. I'm going to teach you this. All right? The Constitution has 7 articles. All right? 1 through 7. Let Eve jump from a sunroof. All right? Let Eve jump. L-E-J. Legislative, executive, and judicial. The first 3 articles are separation of powers. That is the division of power between the 3 branches of government. The legislature writes the laws. Congress, the House and the Senate, writes the laws. The president, the executive, executes or implements the laws. And the judiciary, the 3rd branch, they determine what those laws mean and whether or not those laws are constitutional. They interpret the law, they interpret the Constitution. And by separating those powers, the framers believed that they were avoiding the possibility of your natural rights being violated by government. Monarchies tended to have a king that would be the legislative, the executive, and the judicial all wrapped into one. And what that does is that makes the potential for somebody to abuse that power more likely. All right? Now finally, all right, or 2 more. Checks and balances. All right? Checks and balances are in the Constitution. And I'll give you an example. What it basically does is this means that the government, one branch of government, can make a move, but those moves can be checked by the other 2 to make sure that they are fair and don't violate anybody's natural rights. All right? So, Congress writes a law. The president can do 3 things with that. Let's say the Congress writes a law and passes a law. They then send it to the presidency. The president has 3 options. He can sign it, and it becomes law, and then implement it. He can veto it, which means the House and Senate then can try to override that veto with a 2/3 vote. So think about that. Congress writes law, but the president can veto it. There's a check. The president vetoes it. Congress, if 2/3 of the 535 members of the House and Senate say, nope, we override your veto, which less than 10% of bills are actually overridden, or vetoes are overridden, then it becomes law. All right? checks and balances, stopping, all right? Stopping the other people from moving too quickly. Now the third check on that is, let's say the Congress writes it and passes it, the President signs it and begins to implement it. The courts are the final check. The courts can determine whether or not that law and how it is being carried out is constitutional or not. And if they strike it down, which is the power of judicial review, which we'll get into, then that law is dead. It's done because the courts have said so. All right, now that process isn't as quick as I made it sound, but that's an example of checks and balances. One more. All right, and you should have in your cap, in your brain, 5 or 6 examples of checks and balances. All right, another one. Let's see, if the president wants to appoint somebody to be a judge on the Supreme Court. The president's constitutional power is to choose the judges, but it's the Senate's constitutional power to confirm them. So if you have a Democratic president and a Republican Senate, that Republican Senate may not confirm somebody that is too far to the left Democratic, and the president won't choose somebody that's too far to the right Republican. You may get a moderate because of that. That's a check and a balance. Now, the ultimate check on that is, if that person is confirmed by the Senate to be a judge, well, they have a life term, which is a check. They no longer have to worry about the president and Congress because they have a life term, and they get to use the Constitution to determine whether or not laws and actions of a variety of people are constitutional or not, without fear of being fired by the president or Congress. All right? Now, the final thing is something that goes all the way back to Hammurabi's Code, which is constitutionalism, which is also sometimes called limited government. All right? And what constitutionalism is it means that the government's powers and those things that they can't do are written in a constitution. This goes back to Hammurabi's Code, the first kind of written law. The 12 Tables of Roman law, in which you write the law and then all people are accountable to it. All right? And so what the framers did is they created a legislative branch and gave it powers. And they said there's certain things they can't do. They created an executive branch and said these are the powers they have, and there's things they can't do. And the same with the judicial branch. All right? And then the rest of the Constitution kind of defined and limited their powers. So theoretically, the powers that are given to them in the Constitution, they cannot go beyond those powers. That is what constitutionalism did. All right? Now, just as an aside, that's it for pages 1 and 2 of the notes in Lecture 1, and we should be at 1730 right there. I just wanted to give you a little bit of extra credit. All right? And this is federalism stuff. Who's our governor? Who is the state senator for you, where you live? All right? Who is your state assembly person where you live? Who are your 2 U.S. senators, and who is our House member in the 2nd Congressional District here up in the north? And then how many amendments, how many articles are in the Constitution, and how many amendments are in the Constitution? All right? All right. Hey, see ya 90 more times this year. Bye.